To begin our composition, we are going to open up Ableton Live, and you should be greeted with a screen that looks like this. So what I'm going to get you to do is I'm going you to press the Tab key. So what Tab does is gets us to arrangement mode, which allows us to arrange tracks horizontally like any other DAW, as opposed to session view, which is more for performing your compositions live. But anyway, Ableton is set to have 4 tracks by default, 2 MIDI tracks, and 2 audio tracks. For now, we only need 1 MIDI track. So what I'm going to do is shift and click on the tracks, right click and hit delete. So we only have 1 MIDI track remaining. Okay, we're going to start off this composition by creating our chord progression. So we are going to use this chord chart, which is available on TeachEDM.com, to create our chord progression. So what this is basically is a bunch of common chord progressions used in EDM music, okay? So we have major keys and minor keys. Now I'm going to tell you right now, majority of electronic dance music is written in a minor key. So I highly recommend that you choose a chord progression that's in a minor key because it will sound more authentic. That said, there have been some good EDM compositions written in major keys, but it's going to sound more authentic if you use a minor key. So for this example, I'm going to use the 1, 6, 4, 7 chord progression. Okay? Now that might be gibberish to you, and that's okay. There'll be plenty of methods to work out what this means in a second. But for those who do understand, I guess, chord functions within a minor key, that means we're going to use the first chord of first diatonic chord of a key, then the 6th diatonic chord, the 4th, and the 7th. So let's put this into practice. So I'm going to use the key of C minor. And what I'm going to do is highlight the first 4 bars of my composition track in Ableton and right click and go insert MIDI clip. You can always use the shortcut Control Shift M or Command Shift M if you're using a Mac to insert a MIDI clip. I'm going to double click on this MIDI clip. And I'm going to just drag this up a little bit so we can see what's going on within our 4-bar MIDI clip. And I'm going to right click within the MIDI clip, or sorry, within the piano roll down the bottom. And I'm going to change the grid to 1 bar in length. So now when I enter a note, each note will be 1 bar in length. And that's what we want to start off with. So the 1, 6, 4, 7 chord progression, I'm going to construct this in C minor. So I need to work out what the 1 chord of C minor is, and that is obviously a C minor chord. Just note you need to double click to enter notes. Now I just want to explain this, that enharmonically, this says it's a D sharp, but in context of this key, it's actually an E flat. The E flat and the D sharp key are exactly the same notes. Okay, they're just displayed differently depending what key you're in. But Ableton only shows you the sharps. So if I'm referring to an E flat, it's the D sharp. And there'll be many examples like this. But what you have to really understand is the piano keyboard and the notes of the piano keyboard, and you'll be fine. Okay, for the next chord, I need to add the 6th chord in. So that's A flat major. So I'm going to add this up here. A flat, C, E flat. The next chord I need is F minor, F, A flat, and C. And the last chord I need is B flat major, B, D, and F. Okay, I've input these chords in what we call root position, meaning that the bottom note of each chord, or the root note of each chord, is on the bottom. But this is going to lead to our chords sounding not very smooth. So we need to focus on what's called smooth voice leading. So let's imagine that the chord doesn't work vertically, each chord works horizontally by voice. So this bottom voice here works together. This middle voice here works together. And this top voice here works together. We don't want this bottom voice to have to jump a long way to reach the next note, and then jump again down here and then jump again down here. We want to make it so the chords move nice and smooth. So what we can do is we can move other notes of the chord, or the high notes of the chords, down an octave to be closer to our voices. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to take the top 2 notes of this chord, the A flat major chord, and hit Shift and down on my keyboard. And what this does is move the chord notes down an octave. So now you can see that these two notes up the top, or that were up the top, I'll put them back up there, are exactly the same as the bottom two notes of this chord. Now, this chord, or this bottom voice, now doesn't have to jump at all. It's what we call smooth. It transitions to the next chord note by not even changing. And the only chord note that changes is the top voice now. So that's what we call smooth, because it doesn't have to jump very far. Likewise here, I'm just going to bring the C down. Now it's still the same chord because it's still got the same notes. It's just that they're rearranged differently, so the chord notes don't jump around so much. And for this chord, I'm going to bring the top two notes down, shift down, and bring them down the octave. Now, for some of you, this will seem like absolute gibberish. So I'm going to show you an easy way to work out what chords and what notes you need. A really good resource for building chord progressions is this website, hooktheory.com/hookpad/app. And what we can do, because we are doing full bar, so 4 beats per bar chord progressions, I'm going to click this full bar here, and we can input the chord progression that we are creating. So my chord progression was in C minor, so C minor, and my chord progression was 1, 6, 4, 7. Now, if we click the stable button at the top of this app, and we look within the one octave, so there'll be a box around the octaves, this gives us the notes that we need for our chords by looking at the left-hand side. So C, E flat, G, C, E flat, A flat, C, F, A flat, and D, F, B flat. So this is a really good way to help us understand what chord notes we need to put into our Ableton project. So then you can just transfer those notes over once you've kind of picked a key and chord progression that you want to use. Once we have built our chord progression, we want to drag our 4-bar chord progression out to be 16 bars in length. What we're going to do next is right-click on our original chord progression and click Duplicate. What we're going to do is create a more interesting rhythm for the second part of our chord progression, so this second 16 bars. So to start that, I'm going to double click on the top of the second MIDI clip and change the grid to quavers. Now what we are going to do is apply a rhythm pattern from the right hand section of the chord progression chart. And for this instance, we are going to use rhythm pattern 2. So what this will do is, for the first half of our composition, or for the build-up, what we call the build-up, is going to just play block chords, long chords, quite boring, just continuous notes. For what we call the drop, where the kind of beat really kicks in, we're going to use a more interesting rhythm pattern to make the piece seem more lively and more interesting. So we're going to apply chord pattern 2 here, or rhythm pattern 2, sorry. And so what it is a crotchet with a crotchet tied to a quaver, then a quaver tied to another quaver, and a quaver on the end. So this will give a sort of syncopated feel. So let's move back into Ableton and adjust the notes, and I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is drag a box around our notes, and our first note is a crotchet. So if we have a look at the top of the MIDI clip here, we have a counter. So this 1 means it's the start of the bar, so bar 1. This 1.2 means it's bar 1, beat 2, bar 1, beat 3, bar 1, beat 4, and then the start of bar 2. If we want to crotchet, we want it to be 1 beat in length, so we need to drag it out so it fills up 1 beat in length. Our next note, according to the rhythm chart, is another crotchet, but this crotchet is tied to a quaver. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drag this out to be another quaver in length. So each one of these little grid boxes here are now a quaver. So in Ableton, or using MIDI in general, you don't tie notes together, you just drag them out for the duration that they're supposed to go for, and they just sound the same. Then we need to add another quaver. So what I'm going to do is actually double click the notes in. And that needs to be a quaver tied to a quaver, so it's equivalent to a crotchet in length. And then another quaver to finish off. I'm going to apply this rhythm pattern to the entire 4-bar chord progression, and we'll have a look at it at the end. Okay, so this is what our rhythm should look like once it's completed. But if we play it now, this first 16 bars and this second 16 bars, there's going to be no sound. And that's because we haven't given this track an instrument to play on. So I'm going to come over to my plugins tab and I'm going to find a program called Massive. Now, I use Massive throughout my tutorials and it's the plugin that I'm most familiar with. You don't have to use Massive. You can use whatever you want, really. There's Serum, there's Silence, there's Contact. It doesn't really matter what you use, but you want something that has some professional sounds. So Ableton might have some really good sounds to use as well. And for the remainder of these tutorials as well, I'm going to use Massive a lot. So it's probably best that you do get your hands on a copy of Massive. But if you don't, you can still apply all the same compositional techniques. You'll just need to use a different instrument. But anyway, I'm going to drag Massive on top of this track. So this will load up a stock sound in Ableton. So I'm just going to play it now for a second so you to hear it. And the first 16 bars. Now these chords are a little bit low in the range for my liking. So what I'm going to do is just double click on them and I'll close Massive. And I'm going to highlight them and I'm going to press Shift up and that will move the notes up the octave. And I'm going to do the same to the second 16 bar section. Highlight the notes, press Shift and up and move them up an octave. So now when I play them, they're in a much nicer range that won't interfere with bass frequencies later on. So that was probably a mistake by me. I should have written them in the octave 3 range. You can see that the numbers next to the notes are 3. So if you write your chords in the octave 3 range, they'll generally be better off. Okay, all that's left to do is to select a chord sound. So I'm going to open Massive again. So to open a plugin once you've closed it, basically you double click on the track that you've inserted the plugin on, and click on the spanner on the Massive, on the plugin you've inserted. And I'm going to go into the browser and I've got a range of presets that I have preloaded into my Massive. Now, you might not have these either, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bunch of preset plugins or plugin presets that you can use in your compositions. And it'll be just enough to get you through to complete this course if you have Massive, that is. Okay, so I'm going to pick a sound that I like, and I know these sounds pretty well. So I'm going to choose big saw chords because I want some big sawtooth sounding chords. So what I'm going to do is double click on that, and now if I play the chords in my track, likewise with the more interesting rhythm progression in the second 16 bars. Okay, to recap this lesson, so what we did, we created a 4-bar chord progression using the chord chart on TeachEDM.com. We added 16 bars in of semi-breves, so whole bar chords, and then we added 16 bars of a rhythm pattern that makes the piece a little bit more interesting. So what I want you to do now is open up Ableton, or what's probably best is that you followed along with this video and created it as you go. But apply this same practice in your composition to get started, as this chord progression will be like the main fundamentals, the foundation of our whole composition. So go ahead now and apply these techniques to your own composition.